Hello, this is the Terry Nutlog Model Railway Station. Welcome back. A light here for all things model railways. Today we're going to be getting on with our foam layout. We're going to be doing some scenery, and it's just here in the edge of the shot. We're also going to be looking at something from Temu, this rolling road. Now, was it the bargain it claims to be? We'll see. Let's get on with the show. Hello, so welcome back. Now, firstly, I'd just like to apologise for the fact that we haven't had an episode out for a month now. That's because I've been making layouts for a show that's coming up this weekend, and I've also been attending other shows, and I'll be attending a further show next weekend. So it's very busy for me at the moment. But I can assure you I'm going to be carrying on with this series, because there's nothing worse than a series that comes halfway through and then you never see any more episodes. And we will finish this layout off, I can assure you. So if you're a subscriber, and if you're not, please subscribe. But if you're a subscriber, don't forget to hit the notification bell, and that will tell you when a new episode is out. And I'll be trying to get new episodes out now every couple of weeks. So sorry for the delay, but we're going to carry on. So straight away, we're going to look at this rolling road from Temu. Now, Temu, I would be a top tip from Temu is to have a look at Temu. Never buy anything straight away. Look at something you like, click on it, and then decide whether you like it or not. And then go away for 2 or 3 days, and suddenly you'll find that it's on special offer just for you. Now, this is how Temu works, and they rely on people just jumping in and buying things straight away. So if you look at it, you'll find that the price will come down over 2 or 3 days. The longer you hang on, the more the price comes down. And I did this with this rolling road. Now, initially, this was £24, but I decided not to buy it at the time. I thought I'd think about it. And it gradually came down to £16, but that was a price for me. So you've got to be careful with Temu, because their prices aren't set. And with their special offers and customer discounts, the price tends to vary for individual people. So just hang on, don't rush into anything with Temu. That's my advice. And I think you'll find that the price will come down for you if you show interest in any item. That applies for anything on Temu, not just model railway items. But this rolling road, as I say, was initially £24. And in the end, I ended up paying £24, the same price. But I got an additional 2 sets of rollers with it, and the cable that connects it to the Backman controller. Now it comes with a little multi-plug there that you can use to swap out, so it can fit any controller that you want. But it was handy that it actually fits this easy command controller that I've got. So let's just have a quick look at how it works. So we start this up. This is a Brawa engine, by the way. This is a second-hand engine. Runs very, very well. As you can see, it runs beautifully on that rolling road. Now, because I got the extra sets of rollers, I've actually got enough here for any locomotive or locomotive with tender up to 16 axles, which I think is more than adequate. But you don't need that, because it comes with 8 axle rollers already, and I got the additional 8, bringing it up to 16. But therefore, it covers anything I could ever want to use it for. Now, was this the great bargain? I'll turn that down nice and slowly to a stop, because I don't want the noise interfering with the sound of the mic. There we go. I say it's a very lovely engine, that I find. So was it the bargain that it claims to be? Obviously, if you've got a rolling road with 16 axles capacity from other manufacturers, you could be paying anywhere up to £200 for it. So £24 certainly initially seems to be a bargain. However, to be honest with you, I had quite a lot of problems getting this working. With the additional sets of rollers, they just come loose, and you have to fit them yourselves. And to do that, you need to knock this central bar out, which isn't easy. I had to drive it out with a hole punch. And because I've got quite good modelling skills and quite experience with engineering over the years, it wasn't that tricky for me. I've got a lot of tools, but if you have limited tools and limited experience, I think you'd find it very difficult to drive that central rod out from the two plastic housings at the end. It's a very tight fit. Similarly, when I fitted the rollers, I found that none of them initially had any electrical contact. Now that's because the rollers and the rods themselves are covered in like a protective coating of oil and something like that from the factory, which is a good thing so that it doesn't corrode on the way to you all the way from China. However, it does need to be cleaned up. And even after cleaning it up with some contact cleaner, I found that I still wasn't getting a really reliable electrical connection, not enough to run DCC, certainly not DCC sound engines. I was planning to actually show you running this rolling road with a DCC sound Bachmann 03 shunter, but because it's not that heavy and it relies on the electrical pickup from the rollers, it really isn't reliable enough to show you very well how it works. And so I wouldn't recommend this rolling road for something like DCC sound, but for DCC or just DC, it works okay. Now, you have to compare the fact that I've also had to rub the tops of these rollers here, not the rollers, the actual rods upon which the rollers rest. I've had to actually rub them down with a little bit of very, very fine wet and dry paper, and that has improved the conductivity across the rollers. Now, should you have to do this? Well, it's like anything, isn't it? It's a comparison. If you want to pay £200 odd and get something that works absolutely perfectly straight out of the box, then that's your choice. Or you can pay £24 as I did for this rolling road and have some fettling and a little bit of fiddling to do to get it working. This is like anything with model railways. There is a cost compared to time comparison. And we'll be getting onto that later. But let's put this away and get on with some scenery on our foam layout. So here I am doing my Chad impression, for those of you who know what that is. What, no model railway? Okay, bit of a drift back into the past there. So for those of you that can remember a whole month ago, we finished off covering this layout with the kitchen roll and PVA glue. And sure enough, as it should have done by now, it's set really hard. In actual fact, it was set within 3 days, but as I've said earlier, I was doing other things and just couldn't get on with this project. But what we're going to do today is we're going to use yet another Temu product. It's these scatter materials. Now, I can really recommend these. With the rolling road, there is a slight question as to how much you want to do to get it working. But these scatter materials from Temu, again, if you look at them and wait, you'll find that you can get these for as low as £3.95 for this pot. And in my opinion, obviously this whole show is just my opinion, but in my opinion, they are as good as Woodland Scenics scatter materials. I've had no problems with them leaking colour or fading, and I've used them in the past, and they, in my opinion, are excellent value for money. So I would highly recommend these scatter materials from Temu. And that's what we're going to be using. So what we're going to be doing is basically using a diluted PVA glue. This time it's a 3/4 glue to 1/4 water. Doesn't have to be exact as usual. It's just a rough idea. We're not using the PVA glue absolutely neat, just watering it down slightly. We're going to be spreading that across the layout and scattering on these scatter materials. And that will give us the impression of ground cover and will dramatically change what we have now into looking more like a model railway. Now, what I've already done, if you can see, is I've actually painted the road the grey already. Now, that's a too light a colour to be a realistic road at the moment, but we'll be dry brushing that later. I'll be showing you that. And due to experience, I've also noticed that there are some very steep parts here and here, if that's out in camera shot. And I've painted them with a grey again to represent a cliff face. Now, that's another advantage with using this PVA glue and kitchen roll technique, because when we end up with a cliff face like this, the actual texture that results looks like rock strata. And we can dry brush this to highlight it even more and get a very realistic effect. So let's just crack on and carry on with the scenery. Okay, so this next bit, I'm just standing at the edge here. It doesn't matter that you can't see me. It's more important that you see what I'm actually doing. Now we've got here the glue, which is the 75% PVA to 25% water. As I say, it doesn't have to be exact. A little tip here, I've actually put it on the track earlier on. I was having it in front of the layout, and that of course means dragging a dripping brush across the track. Potentially you're going to get glue all over the point, and that will cause a lot of problems in the future. So just make sure that the glue doesn't drip all over the place. Remember, in the past when we did the initial landform, the glue was really slapped on, but now where the glue is where this scatter material will stick. So we don't want to be getting glue all over the road. We certainly don't want to be getting it all over the track. The most important thing is to be careful now, as though we're painting rather than just slapping glue on as an adhesive. So I'll just start off. I'm not going to show you the whole process, because basically once we've done a little bit, it's just a matter of repeating until the whole layout is done. So what we're going to do, make sure we don't get too many drips. Get the glue onto the back scene here. And it's as simple as this. We just basically want to layer up an area of glue, but be careful as we go. As you see, I'm being careful around the edge of the road here. I don't want to absolutely smother the road, because when we use the scatter will stick to it. And regardless of how careful you are, you will find that the scatter will end up being blown or drifting about, and it will, I can assure you, end up on the parts that you don't want. If you've got glue on the road, it will stick to that. So just be careful, especially when you get up to the top of the back scene here and you're coming up to the skyline. You want to be careful not to obviously get glue onto the sky, because grass growing in the sky does not look particularly realistic. So there we go. We just start off with that little bit. Last little bit there. You don't need to absolutely plaster this with glue. If you put too much glue on, it doesn't really matter. But too much glue will tend to soak through the scatter and could give it possibly a weird sort of wet look effect. So you just want enough glue there that it's covered, and then we'll add some scatter. Now these two scatters, I've got two different types. I've got one that's an autumn, so it's a green with sort of little bits of brown in, and this is a summery green. And I always find that mixing two colours together is the best thing you can do. I always sprinkle it straight from the pot, but this actually has like a little sieve and an area to use a spoon if you want to. So we're just going to mix them together roughly as we go. So we put some on there, and then we'll use the other colour, and we'll scatter over the top of it, remembering what goes on first. Even if we cover it up with this, once we suck it back off, that will be still there as the base. Now what you want to do is stop slightly short, which I haven't done there, I've got a bit carried away, but stop slightly short of where the glue ends, and that way when you put more glue on, you won't be ending up covering the brush with a load of this scatter. If you do, you'll end up with the brush all clogged up with scatter. It's not a big issue. Of course, you can clean it off on a bit of kitchen roll, but you can progress quite quickly if you don't continue to dip the brush into the scatter. It will just slow you down. So what I'm going to do is continue doing the whole layout like this now, avoiding, of course, obviously the cliff face parts, which we'll leave as the grey. And I'm going to do the whole layout, which I won't show you because it's time consuming, and just basically the same thing repeated again and again. And when I've done all of that, we'll come back and see the end result. So this is the stage we've got to now. I've covered the whole layout with the scatter materials. I've mixed it up as best I can, and I've used 2.5 pots of the scatter materials to cover this. Now, when I spoke earlier about sucking it off, I wasn't doing a Kenneth William impersonation. I was actually talking about using this. Now, this is a little cordless vacuum cleaner that I use specifically for scenery, and I will be sucking back the scatter materials with that vacuum cleaner and reusing them, because the majority of them will actually be sucked back up once the glue has dried, and I can get at least a pot back and reuse that at the front of the layout. Of course, the advantage with that is that the colours will be mixed together, and it will present an even more realistic approach to grass, because grass is always a mixture of colours and not just a single tone of colour. So when we've finished with this glue drying, I'm going to use the vacuum cleaner. Of course, most people working on their own layout won't have a dedicated vacuum cleaner. And this layout is designed to be somebody just starting in the hobby. So I would recommend that you just use a normal vacuum cleaner with some sort of sieve. They do say a pair of tights or ladies' stockings over the nozzle, and that way you can reuse the scatter and put it back into a container and reuse it at the front of the layout, as I'm going to be doing. So once this has dried, we'll move on. But in the meantime, let's have a look at this platform that I've made, and we'll talk about kits and cost and where we are. Okay, so while we're waiting for the glue to set, I thought I'd have a little look at this platform. Now, this is a dapole platform, and this was already pre-made. I got it from a show, but it was twice the length of that. Basically, this wall was running along here, and I cut it in half so that it will fit the layout. I've painted it grey already because I'm going to be showing you some dry brushing techniques for the brickwork. But as you can see, it was already partly assembled. When I got it for £1, I think, at a model railway show in a second-hand store. And items like this can save us a lot of money, but they can also save us a lot of time. Of course, you could make this yourself from cardboard with the brick paper, like we've made the tunnel mouth, or you could make it with just cardboard and leave it as a concrete structure, or you could buy the dapole kit or use a Hornby platform section. There are many, many choices, but each one involves a time and a cost. And I thought I'd just go into that very briefly while we're here waiting. And for that purpose, I've done this little visual aid. As you can see, it's a quality item. I've spent a lot of time, took all of 3 minutes to make this. Now, what we're talking about here at the top is 1:76 scale. So just in case people get confused, of course, this applies to any scale in model railways. But at the moment, we're talking about 1:76 scale, which this foam layout is. Now, on this graph, I've done it this way to try and show all the aspects of time and money that we face when we deal with model railways. So at the top, we've got 1:76 scale, which is what we're dealing with. And we've got cost running up. As you can see, I've made some alterations to try and make it a little bit plainer and simpler. It was a bit complicated to start with. And this is one of the reasons that I'm doing this, because people that know me often accuse me of being overly critical, and I tend to do joke about things at exhibitions. But the point of why I'm doing this is to show that everyone has their own place on this scale, and there's no good or bad, it's just where we all lie. And maybe it will help explain things to people and understand why they feel they're not being satisfied with their modelling. So down in this bottom right hand corner, we have 0, for want of a better effect, and that is 0 time and 0 cost. So cost goes up this way and time only goes across to the left. So in the bottom right hand corner, I've put, just as an example, a wooden train set. Now, a wooden train set, very cheap sort of thing that a child might use, 4-year-old, 5-year-old. You'd buy it for, maybe £10, set it up on the carpet in just a matter of minutes, and the engine and wagons are very, very primitive and just pushed around. Now, that is satisfied as a 5-year-old. They would be delighted, I'm sure, with that. I'm sure many 5-year-olds would be very excited to have a train set like that for Christmas. And at the other end, we've got the end of the time. In other words, something that involves a lot of time. And at this top left-hand corner, I've put P4. Now, for those of you that don't know, P4 means prototypical 4, and that is said to be the highest level that you can be in 1:76 scale, where everything would be exactly correct. You'd have handmade track, handmade locos and rolling stock, possibly all scratch built, certainly kit built and modified, ready to run. And basically that requires a high skill level, because as we move to the left, we require more skill. Now, skill is something we develop over time, but the time, of course, goes to the left as well. So if we start in the hobby, we're not going to end up starting with very high skill levels unless we've come to model railway hobby from another hobby that involves modelling, such as military modelling or marine modelling, in which case it's possible we've already got quite high skill levels. But for the majority of people starting out in model railways, they'll have quite a low skill level. That's nothing to be ashamed of. We all have to learn. And the example of using glues and painting and dry brushing and stuff like we're doing in this episode is all something we learn over time. In other words, progressively, we all move to the left. So if we have a wooden train set as the basic, very low cost, very low time, as we move up the cost scale, we get to a backman train set. Now, an example here I'm using is the Whiskey Galore train set, as it was called, which had a Class 20 diesel locomotive with DCC sound and some wagons that were grain wagons and a brake van, all appropriate and matching to being a grain train that delivers grain to a distillery in Scotland. It was a very good set and very good value indeed, considering it was DCC sound. But at the same time, although the cost now increases, because it's a train set and we can set it up very quickly, the actual time involved is relatively small. Compared to if we make a P4 model of, say, that same distillery in Scotland, where we'd have to make everything perfect, we'd have to make an exact copy of the buildings. That, of course, involves research at the bottom. So research, although takes a great deal of time, does not involve a great deal of actual financial cost, unless we want to make visits to the site ourselves. But we can do research on the internet for very little cost indeed nowadays. And therefore, although that takes a lot of time, the cost is low. But as we move up from research going through, say, 00, which I haven't marked, and say EM, and finally to P4, the time and the cost goes up. And so we have this diagonal line showing time and cost going up. Now, at the bottom, we have what I've called perfection. Of course, that's a debatable term, and basic to the right. But the point of this is that somewhere we all lie. Some people will want to be up at this absolute top left-hand corner, and they won't settle for anything less. Some people are absolutely happy to be down here at the bottom right because they just want a train set that they can run on their table or their carpet, and that's fine. And this model that we're doing here lays somewhere around this area. It's quite simple to do. It doesn't require a lot of skills. It has a low skill level. It doesn't require too much time, and it doesn't require too much cost. And as I say, if we consider an average where most people are somewhere in the middle here. As I say, there's no shame, there's no stigma, there is no gratification or indeed praise for anybody on this scale. We all have our own point to be. And you may think this is a little bit pointless, a little bit of a waste of time, and just a fill-in to edge the time of the show out. But I can assure you it's not. It's been something I've been wanting to say for quite some time. And although I sometimes criticise other people's layouts at shows and make a joke of it, and I hope it does come across as a joke because I am only joking, but ultimately I think everybody really wants to move towards the left. Now, that's not because you have to. If you're happy to be at the right, then that's great. I'm not criticising for anybody that wants to stick to basic, low-cost, simple layouts. It depends how in-depth you take the hobby. But the more in-depth you get into the hobby, naturally, the more you will want to migrate towards the left, towards that perfection. Not necessarily P4. The majority of people will be happy to migrate towards the left in this region around the 00 scale. But that is fine. And as I say, I've done this just to try and simply explain and give a visual idea of where people lie within the model railway hobby. As I say, there's no good, there's no bad. It's just an explanation. And myself, I'm always trying to go towards the left, always trying to make things better, always heading for perfection. But of course, perfection can never be achieved. There'll always be something that can be improved. But in attempting to reach there, we're always increasing our skill levels, and we're always increasing our ability to develop and change and adapt to new ideas. And that is what the hobby's about, and that is what the skill of modelling is about, and that, indeed, you could argue, is what life is about. So let's get on with some dry brushing and deal with this platform. So for this next part, I'm going to be showing you some dry brushing on the platform. And for that, I've used some Vallejo rust colour paint. Now, this is actually airbrush paint, but you can use it with brushes as well. It's just as good. And what we're going to be doing now, as I say, is going to be doing some dry brushing technique on this platform edge. And the thing to do with dry brushing is we need a nice flat brush, if you can see that. You get some paint on the brush, and this is the crucial part. We get as much of the paint off as we can on the kitchen roll. And then, using the dry brush, because the mortar lines tend to go in this direction, we're going to try and brush down. It's a bit awkward because I'm doing it, trying to show you the camera. So I'm going to go down gently. Bit too much paint on there, as you can see. So what I'm going to do, because I'm filling in the lines, so I'm going to get some more paint off. I'm going to rub that off with the kitchen roll. I'm going to get some more paint off the brush in that way. So there's hardly any paint left at all. I'm going to do it left-handed here to try and get a better picture. I think what you'll see now is we're just covering it with the brush. Now, to be honest with you, although this is a dry brushing technique, as I showed in episode 4, I don't think that for brickwork this works particularly well. I actually think that a better way of doing it for beginners is to use those coloured pencils. But there we go. As more of the paint comes off the brush, we're getting a slightly better effect on the brickwork there. However, if I hold that right up so that you can see, I think a lot of the lines between the brickwork, where the mortar is, are still being flooded. However, I'm going to carry on with this as best I can, and we'll see the end result. As I say, I think the actual coloured pencils for beginners is better, but this is a dry brushing technique. As I say, it's essential to get most of the paint off the brush, and that's why it's called dry brushing, obviously, and just try and concentrate on getting the tiniest bit of paint on the brush and dry brushing across the direction of the mortar with the brush as flat to the actual model as you can get it. And that way you should hopefully build up the colour of the bricks and leave the mortar colour intact as a grey. So I'll carry on and we'll come back and see what the end results are. Now, as you can see, I've not had a very great success with this, and all I've actually done is successfully filled in the mortar lines with a brick colour, leaving the majority of it grey. So I'm actually going to revert to the pencil technique that I had originally in the episode of 4. So I've carried on this side. As you can see, we've got the initial bit of the dry brushing, which hasn't come out very well. And then as we've moved round, I've gone on to the pencil technique as we used in episode 4, and I actually think that's come out better. I have struggled with this because the actual relief of the brickwork is very, very shallow, and there's not a lot of actual mortar joints to work. That's why I don't think the dry brushing worked particularly well. However, it could have been the fact that the brush is too stiff, or that I wasn't very good at it, to be honest with you. Like I say, I'd rather show you a mistake and allow you to understand that there are many mistakes made in modelling, rather than just show you an edited perfection every time, because that way it might put you off. And the idea is that, I've been doing this for many years and I'll make lots of mistakes. And that way I think we've recovered from it slightly. I've used the normal rust-coloured paint, neat, to highlight those little uprights. And I think that's acceptable. And I'm going to move on now with the black wash on the top. Okay, so for the black wash, I'm using just a little tiny spot of the Vallejo black here in a mixing tray. And I've got a little tub here with water in, going to stick the brush in, get plenty of water on the brush, and just add it in to the paint. See what you're doing there? Plenty of water. So if we mix that up, you can see it's very watery and very thin, and that's exactly what we want because this is a wash. So what we want to do is, now this works best if we keep the model flat. You can do it on a vertical surface, but the water and the paint will tend to run down and pool in the bottom. You can get some quite good effects by doing that. But by keeping the model flat, if we just brush this on, and we need to be quite quick. This isn't like painting. We want to just cover the whole area as quickly as we can, really. And as you can see, it's already highlighting the stones, and certainly the very wet, very liquid paint will tend to run into the gaps between those slabs as represented on the top of the platform. And the idea of that is, as it dries, it will highlight those. Now, this paint will dry slightly lighter than it is at the moment because it's a wash and diluted with water very heavily. It appears quite dark at the moment, but as it dries, it will actually tend to fade out. So don't feel that you've put too much on at this moment. However, if you do actually flood it completely and you feel that there is too much, then you can always, of course, just use a bit of kitchen roll to remove it. So we just do the ramp in the same fashion, and then we'll be finished. I think we've just about mixed enough up there. Always try to keep going with the wash in the same direction. If you work it in the direction of the actual stones, you'll find it comes out with a slightly weird effect. But if you keep going in the same direction, you end up with a slightly, what I would call a rain washed effect. So we're just going to leave that now. Don't be tempted to start poking about with the brush and interfering with it. Just allow it to dry now, and we'll come back later and see what that looks like when it's finished. So I have vacuumed off a lot of the scatter. As you can see, there's some slightly bald patches about the place where, to be perfectly honest with you, I haven't left the glue quite long enough to dry, and I can go back over that once I've finished filming and put another layer back on, because I actually sucked back off with the vacuum cleaner nearly 2 whole containers of scatter. So we've got plenty left in the tub that we can put back on, and I shall do that again. I'm just trying to move on a little bit to get this program finished. So the last thing we're going to do is do some dry brushing. Now this paint I've got here, I'll move it into the camera shot. This is an acrylic black paint. It's actually, I use it normally on the sides of the layouts to finish them. It's a very, very strong colour. So I've got some on the brush already. We're going to have to wipe absolutely virtually all of this off the brush. Otherwise, when I use this on the road, we're going to end up painting it black rather than grey. So little test there on the kitchen roll. We've still got quite a lot on. Now this is a big flat soft brush, ideal for dry brushing. We're going to very, very lightly just go across the road. As you can see, we're putting quite considerable black marks on the grey already. And if we're doing a bit too much, we can always just use the brush lighter, or of course wipe more paint off on the kitchen roll. I always find that this dry brushing technique requires a bit of practice. What I'm trying to do here around the corner is simulate the way that vehicles would come up and down the road. I'm not going left to right. I'm trying to follow the course of vehicles that might travel up and down the road, because these black marks would effectively be tyre tracks and stuff like that left on the road. Nearly at full reach there, struggling a bit to get over to the edge, but you can see the idea. I'm not worried too much about this section because it's going to be under the platform, but just up the road, as we're running out of paint on the brush, you'll find the technique becomes easier because you obtain more of the desired effect of the light brushing. This is why I think when you start with this, you always want to practice on a spare piece of cardboard or paper and just get the idea of what you're doing to start with. I would never try dry brushing for your first attempt on a layout that you want to be proud of, that you want to show off, because you will make a mistake. This is certainly one of the things that requires a little bit of practice, a little bit of experience to get right. It's something that is easily obtainable with a little bit of practice, but something that you won't find comes naturally unless you've been into modelling, as I said earlier, and had the experience already. So there we go. The more I dry brush, the darker the road becomes. We just want to simulate wheels up and down. If we put a bit too much on, by going over and over again with a dry brush, we can effectively fade it out. And that way we're toning that area down. That's quite a good bit of raised area there that's being highlighted. That area now is being highlighted where the glue has run down. If you remember, I said in the last episode the glue had run down, and this has created quite a good effect of uneven tarmac. Now, while we've got the paint on the brush, I'll just show you very briefly. I'll move the layout across so it's absolutely dead in the centre. And we're going to dry brush these cliff faces. Now, as you can see, the creases in the kitchen roll or the strata of the rock, whichever we want to believe it is, move in a bottom left to top right direction. We don't want to dry brush them in that direction. We want to come across them at 90 degrees. And so by holding the brush with virtually no paint on it at all now, by dry brushing across this area, we're actually going to highlight these rock strata or creases in the rock. Don't go mad with it. Less is more. It's easier to put a little bit more on. I think that there we are. Gives quite a good effect straight away. It's easier to put more on than attempt to try and take it off. Of course, if you do make a mistake, you can always paint the whole thing grey again and start from the start. But I always think less is more, particularly with dry brushing. Just be very gentle. We'll just do this last little part up in the corner here. Again, move the layout over. Just using the brush very lightly to highlight those creases as we've done there. And the last little part round by the tunnel. And I think that is as far as we're going to go today. I'll see you in the next part. So just a last little look at the layout before we go. As we can see, the platform now down here with that wash on top has highlighted the stones on top, the paving stones on top of the platform. I think that's come out really nicely. And because the paint settles differently because of the higher and lower levels of those paving stones, some have come out darker than others. And it looks very realistic and also highlights the joints in the paving stones. As I say, the dry brushing has worked quite well. Unfortunately, the scatter material is lifted back up in places, but I can redo that off camera. And in the next episode, I'll have had all of that done and it will look a little bit better. Of course, there's a lot more to do. Desmond was very disappointed with this episode. There's nothing dangerous at all. He did advise me not to eat PVA glue. That was as best as he could do. So it's a bit tame for him, but he's coming to join us on this last part. And as I say, yeah, by next episode, I'll be redoing the scatter and we'll be doing some fences and finishing off scenery and doing other bits and pieces. We've got a couple more episodes to go. And of course, we've got the dreaded ballasting. Now, ballasting is something you can do or you can leave, and it's not something you have to do as your first layout. I will show you how to do ballasting on this layout, but as I say, if you're not confident with it, I would leave it, because as I will show you when I do ballasting, that is somewhere where you can actually cause a lot of problems and actually spoil the layout. So we'll show you and we'll go through ballasting in the next episode and we'll carry on with some scenery. And like I say, within a couple of episodes now, which hopefully will come out every couple of weeks, we'll see the layout progress to being close to being finished. A layout is never finished, but we'll get it as close to being finished as we can. and then we can add bits and pieces, but I think we'll need to move on to other items so that we don't get stuck on this one topic, because the whole point of this show is to show all things model railways. But we will be returning to this layout even once it's finished, because don't forget, we've still got the other side to do. So for now, I'm going to say cheery bye. And as usual, I'm going to say, if you like this episode, please like, please subscribe. And as I said at the start of the show, please hit the notification bell. And that way you'll be notified when the next episode comes out, which repeatedly I say will hopefully be in a couple of weeks, but you never know. I've got lots of shows coming on. I do my best to keep these episodes coming out, but I can't guarantee it. So if you hit the notification bell, you'll be told when a new episode is coming out. So all that's left to say from me and from Desmond, of course, is our usual catchphrase, which, as you should know by now, is nice one. I'll see you next time.